You comfortable over there?
Oh, yeah, I'm always comfortable.
Good. Hey, I want to welcome everybody who's also joining us from Intuit TV and the Intuit Network. We're excited to have a casual and an engaging discussion today with a guy who needs no introduction, especially after Caroline just told his life story and was able to tell you all the impact that he's had on everyone. But I think one of the things that everyone who steps away who knows Bill would say is, not only is he the coach, he's a friend, and he's an inspiration. He's an inspiration to everyone who comes into contact with him and everyone who reads anything about him. What you may not know is this is a very rare occurrence. Bill's someone who likes to work behind the scenes, likes to work through people, likes to take no credit, and very seldom, if ever, grants an interview. So this is a treasure that he is doing on behalf of us because he has been with Intuit since the early days. He was our second chief executive officer. He has been the chairman of our board since 1998. I have been a work in process being coached by him for 10 years, and I still am considered the bottom of the class. I still have to sit in the corner with a dunce's cap, but he works at it.
You've been teaching me for years.
Yeah, listen to you. So anyway, we're excited to have you here. The way we're going to do this is we've got an hour together. We'll spend the first half of that or so. I have a series of questions I just want to tee up for Bill to start to talk about the theme of what it takes to create an awesome product and how important that is today for companies and their success. And we'll go back and forth a little bit, and then we're going to open it up to you, and we'll take questions from anyone in the room, as well as anyone out there in the audience in the virtual world, and we'll have an interaction about anything you want to talk about. So that's the game plan. You ready?
Whatever you want, I'm ready.
All right. Well, let's start with an easy one. Awesome.
The easy one is, why are you putting me on all these social networks and stuff like this today? Okay, I wanted to ask you the first question. I never do any of this.
Well, I would say two reasons. It's all about draw. And when you say Bill Campbell is keynoting, they say Pink Floyd, Rolling Stones, Bill Campbell, and Bruce Springsteen, I'm in.
You're starting to show your age here, boy.
Hey, I tell you what. That's true. That's true. Hey, so Bill, tell us about a product or a service that you've used sometime in your life that just blew your socks off. What was the product and why was it so impressive when you used it?
Well, listen, I'm Apple biased, obviously, and I think the iPhone was one of the greatest breakthroughs ever. I mean, I couldn't believe it the first time I looked at it. Steve had me over, I used to go over to when Scott Forstall was doing it, and it was just nothing more than images on a screen, and Johnny Ivey had the mock-up of what the hard goods product would look like, and it was a blowaway. Just even looking at it on the screen and watching the user interaction going from screen to screen or icon to icon, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on that. It transformed everything that I did. For somebody that really didn't text message a lot, 3 hits to do anything on a BlackBerry and stuff like that. It was just really hard to do anything like that. But this became a computer in your pocket. I don't know that I've ever, and still have not been as wowed by anything that I've seen since that point. I mean, that was one that really took my breath away. And, look, everybody's out there now trying to copy it, but that was still the breakthrough product from my view.
Yeah, well, it is for me too, and I'm going to share one with you that's a little more recent. I'm in the midst of a midlife crisis thanks to the fact that you just called out that all the bands that I followed were 70s and 80s. And so in the middle of this, I've got 2 teenage daughters, and they decide to tell me that the car that I'm driving is an embarrassment to them at school. And in the back of my mind, coming from a neck of the woods like you do, that Pennsylvania, West Virginia stuff's not far apart. My dad always said, man, a car is a point A to point B thing, so do not spend more than you need to on a car. So my daughters take me shopping. I end up on a Mercedes dealership because Alex Lentner convinced me that German was the only car to buy. I pick out a car that has a really loud engine, so I don't need a gold necklace now because I've got the roar under the hood. But it looks like a sedan. It's a Mercedes 63 AMG. But when I'm pulling off the lot, Bill, I go into this post-purchase dissonance. I hear my dad saying, what a dummy. You spent all that money for a car. But as soon as I'm taking the turn, guess what happens? The seat puffs up on one side. And then I get out on the interstate and the seat puffed up on the other side. And then it started doing this lumbar action. I'm getting this massage, and at the end of the day, man, I can't drive another car now that doesn't have these performance seats. So you've got the iPhone, and I've got massage seats going on. It's pretty good.
I'm starting to worry about you. We should have a board meeting here soon.
I told you, buddy, a work in process. A work in process.
Holy crap.
Oh, man.
It massages you.
It massages you.
Holy
Let's see the iPhone do that.
Well, listen, it causes a little vibration here and there. Speaking of that, I better turn that
put
thing
that
up.
on vibrate, would you? For multiple reasons. Honestly, that's kind of looking back. Let's look forward for a minute. You have exposure to some of the best and brightest in the Valley. So as you look ahead, is there anything on the horizon that has you excited that you think is going to take products to the next level?
Well, look, without giving away any of Apple's confidential stuff, but look, you've seen a lot of things that are going on with the application of technology to really intimate things. Sergey Brin has headed up Google X, and it was called Google Goggles, now it's called Glass, and the computer on the eyeglasses. A phenomenal breakthrough, and it just announced, I think, last couple of days or so, that Andreessen Horowitz and Kleiner Perkins are going to each pull out some funds to be able to invest in third-party applications that could take advantage of what limited things that you can do on that on Google Glass. But it is one of those things that begins to break through. So when you start to think about glasses or watches, things like that, they become as intimate as the cell phone was back in the day when Motorola dominated that, and it turned it, rather than something from a cell phone, but into something that could be used more wholly as let's call it a computing device, for lack of a better term. So I think that's the trend that you're going to start to see. How many of these other things out there are that important? For instance, the driverless cars and stuff like that, don't know. But I'm blown away by what Sergey and his team there have accomplished. There's a certain ubiquity that's going on here in Wi-Fi and connectivity, et cetera. And I think what Google is figuring out, or at least Sergey Brin is that he wants to apply it to a lot of consumer applications, really consumer applications, not just phones.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on a couple things. This computer that starts to move with you, be much more interactive, and it seems like it's more human interaction. It's gestures, and it's the ability to blink in Google Glasses. And so what are some of the factors or the contributors that you see as you look at companies like Intuit or LinkedIn or Apple or Google, or companies that I know you often talk positively about? What are the environmental factors that have to exist to create really great products time and time again?
So what you need more than anything are great people. Not to demean anybody in this room who's doing something other than engineering. The world that we have right now today is one of product creation, and we have to keep thinking that comes from engineers. I know all the time. The history of our company comes from Scott Cook, who was not an engineer, who understood what was needed in a certain area and helped create the metaphor. There was a guy who was commonly referred to as a co-founder, Tom Prue, who was a guy that Scott recruited off the campus at Stanford. But the fact is, Scott had that vision. But I say to you right now that if you can have green eye shade engineers that know how to program, and you can have engineering people who really think their way through understanding the application of technology and use it well, those are the ones that companies need to be able to be great. Think about Jack Dorsey. That's the Twitter chair, who was the CEO of Square, the founder of, basically the founder of Twitter, and invented the metaphor. He was a high school kid who figured out a way to have a tracking system for taxi cabs. And he when you go back and read anything or talk to Jack, a very, very humble guy, he approached all the taxi cab companies in New York, and one of them responded. And the one that responded had him come there and it went to see what he had. And they put it in the taxi cabs, brought him to New York, put him in college. This was when a guy was 16, 17 years old, put him in college, got him a college degree, and used him to do the taxi tracking where it was, and so that they could deploy it in a more efficient way. What did Jack do? Well, he took an existing technology and turned it into something that was enormously useful. The taxi cab company turned it into something that was even more useful than that. So look, Silicon Valley, I came here in 1983, and the thing that you need to know is that there were companies back then that were Microsoft teamed up with IBM, and then after that, the clones started to come. And when the clones came, they were all hiring IBM sales guys to come in there and run their companies. Well, it didn't work. These people didn't get the respect of the engineers. They couldn't make enough difference in the way they looked at and used technology to make their products better. This became nothing more than a marketing scheme. And that was, of course, that was a terrible thing. None of them, the only one that ever emerged out of that pile was Compaq. So, when you sit here and you realize that great products are what's going to drive a company, how many of those companies on the East Coast just died? DEC and people like that, all of them went away. Even Xerox to a certain extent. But here, there's a premium on engineers who can understand the use of technology and know how to apply it. Now, that doesn't mean that, look, we need product managers. Jack, again, refer Jack Dorsey or Steve Jobs, who played the Jack Dorsey role. These guys became, Jack likes to call product managers editors. So, they look at what the customer requirements are. And so you can do some breakthrough, not limit the functionality of it, make sure that you understand what the competition is, refine it all. Product managers have to do that. And engineers will pay attention, listen. A lot of times, even the person who's running the project, the head of engineering, will know exactly what to do. But even then, requires some course correction. So if you take engineering, product development, and product management, put those two things together, you've got the basis of anything that's going to be great that goes on in the Valley. Now, of course, everything else becomes very strong supporting functions. If you look at Apple today and think about the whole logistics function that Tim Cook put in place from 97 on, or into 98 and early 98 on, it really made a big difference in the way you could apply that technology to an end user from a manufacturing standpoint, affordability standpoint, things like that. But I watched a company like Kodak. I worked at Kodak and was general manager for consumer products for Kodak in Europe. And they had digital technology before anybody. And I was there and used to go and see it. I would go over to the Kodak lab when I was the director of marketing, and I would go over there to the lab and say, why aren't we using this? Well, nobody can take this up to Mr. Fallon, who was the CEO of the company. Some of these things just can't emerge. A 400-speed film, 1,000-speed film. Somebody would come out with a 200-speed film and say, why are we using that? Well, it gives you an extra stop in ambient light. A what? And so you'd sit there and say, Fuji's kicking the crap out of us with a sharper film. Why don't we make our film sharper so that we can compete better and not lose market share? So there's role for product managers to be able to guide the evolution of technology. But boy, what you learn when you come here is that the world is about great products, and everything here is a supporting function. One of my jokes all the time is to say, people will say, why is marketing losing its clout? And my joke is, because it forgot its first name, product. So,
yeah. Bill, there's a couple of really important nuggets, and since I've spent time with you, I'm going to try to tease them apart so we can talk about them with the audience. One is you often talk about the importance of entrepreneurial engineers, very innovative engineers, not what you have referred to in the past as code jockeys, people who just take a direction from someone and write. And I've heard you say that you expect an engineer to understand the problem and come up with multiple ways to solve it, and the day that you hear a product manager or a general manager tell an engineer, here's what I want you to do, that's the day you were going to insert your foot somewhere that wasn't always in your ear. And so there's this element of creating an environment where you want to make sure that people are getting close to the customer. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you feel about that?
There were days.
I'm trying to keep it G-rated on my side, so you can do your thing.
No, there were days. Eric Dunn's here in the first row. He knows what used to happen in the days. We were trying to get into electronic banking, and we hired people from banks, and the banks, they were all with their, I don't know, COBOL programming, whatever the hell they were doing. And they would come down there and say, put that feature in. I said, Jesus Christ, if you ever tell anybody to if you ever tell an engineer what feature to put in, I'm going to throw you out the window. See, that was
good. That's not quite the version I've heard, but that's a good version.
That's as G-rated as I can make it.
I give it. Man, you're Disney style today. This is good.
I mean, listen, I have my over-under on F-bombs is going to be 0 today.
It's all right. All I can say is social networks.
I'm not going to drop one. I got Lannis in the first row. It's like my father confessor here. But what happens is, if I said to an engineer, here's the customer problem, and they would go, okay, let me think about that for a while. Take it overnight, maybe take it over for a couple of nights. You come back the next day, you sit in a room, you sit and talk to them about it, and they have a better way of doing that than just bolting on some stupid-ass feature that some product manager that came from a bank wants to do. So, in Silicon Valley, the culture of think about the companies that are started. Zuckerberg, Drew Houston from Dropbox. I mean, you can go up and down. Mike McHugh. All of these are strong technical people that have really understanding of how to create things that are in their mind that they really want to do. Do they need product managers to refine, edit, guide? Of course they do. But the idea here is that great products come from great engineers, and I at the risk of offending anybody, I don't. That's a strong view I have.
Now, you know what, Bill? I think it's an important view because many times when you're trying to talk about building products and services, you can skate past the fact that there's one group who can actually write the code, and that's the engineers. But the thing that I wanted to also point out is, and this is where your humility comes in, you've given multiple examples of leaders of awesome companies and awesome products that weren't engineers. You mentioned Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was a bunch of things. He was a marketer, product manager, unbelievable sort of organizer of great talent. You mentioned Jack Dorsey, who would profess to be a great designer. Scott Cook. Scott Cook is someone who hasn't written product, but is a great product leader. And another example is you. I mean, I remember coming up here from TurboTax and hearing from the engineers that the thing they loved about you is that you loved what they did. You loved the products they created. You created the environment where barriers got taken out of their way so they could get stuff done. So talk to me about, if you're not an engineer, what are the things that leaders can do to create the environment where great products get created? If you're not a product manager, you're not an engineer. Say you're a general manager or some other function.
Well, if you're a manager of these kinds of groups yourself, not an engineer, and no one has done a better job in Silicon Valley than you have in driving product excellence. There probably, I guess there are probably 3 ways to look at it. We have the current products that we have to make better.
Yep.
In a lot of ways, it means they have to be written better to make them faster, tighter, smaller, and really improve its functionality, particularly on the easy use side. I mean, we have still products that we've had for years in QuickBooks and Quicken and things like that. Then you have, it is taking the same metaphor and really rethinking it.
Mm-hmm.
So solving the same problem in a different way. I would say Mint tried to solve the same problem that Quicken did in a completely innovative and different way.
Yeah.
And then the third one would be, I guess, just starting from scratch. You know, a lot of the stuff that you've been fostering in the 10% time, you know, where people go off and try to think about what they can do. What are things that are in categories that we really appreciate and know, but have never approached or done? What do we do there? So what you don't want to do is ever think that you can trivialize any one of those approaches. If all we think about is that new stuff, in the early days of Google, I mean, they would put out incomplete products so that these guys could go on and do something better, another more creative thing. And that was always, how long was Gmail in beta? You know, 100 years or, you know. But part of that was that the key people left. It wasn't until Sundar Pichai came back in and took that on and decided to refine it, make it better, and get it out where it was a firm, solid, good product, that people are now proud of Gmail. Gmail had an interesting metaphor. A lot of people liked it. It became, I mean, virtually ubiquitous. It was really, really good product, but it became a really much better product when they finally fixed everything that's there. What do you do? How do you bring new people in there and say, this is what, oh, geez, I want to get this new thing out. I want to do this new we've got the value that we have in making sure that we can do like we're working on right now with QBO. When we first did QBO, I mean, it was a I can't see, I would have to drop an F-bomb in there. Cluster blank. See, that's pretty good, huh? See, Lance, that's what happens. You lose the flavor when you got me recorded. God damn.
There you go. We've broken through. We're there.
So I would say, when you think about those, the value that we have in our engineering organizations to apply the best people to everything that we do, that we have to have high quality people making sure that we continue to evolve our products.
Yeah.
In category 1. 2 is think through what we're trying to solve and what are we trying to do with our tax product, and how do we make that metaphor better. Some of it is, as we do, with help. Some of it has been over the years with online. Some of it has been just with breakthroughs and way of thinking.
The new phone and taking the picture and
small, exactly. Yeah. And then, what are the products like something like SnapTax that comes out of the woodwork? I want to make sure that we don't think, and great companies don't think that everything's done on something that's totally new, that's right. Outside the category of the current metaphors. So it's respecting engineering. It's respecting customers. It's making sure that product managers understand the competition in the marketplace and make sure that we're focusing engineering on solving those problems. So the engineers have to solve them.
Yeah, there's 2 points there, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. One is what Bill's described for those of you in Intuit is horizon planning, horizon management. It's his coaching and Scott's coaching and the collective organization's belief that we don't have cash cows. We have the opportunity to reimagine our existing products and take them into the next chapter, which is why our company's gone from DOS to Windows and Windows to web and web to mobile. And we continue to look for ways to grow and expand. And we also look for ways to take those and create adjacent opportunities. Mint my business, Mint for the bank. And then finally, we have unstructured time, which we create things that just didn't exist at all. So that's one key piece of it. The other thing, Bill, I'll share with you is, as you know, we are students of the best practices we see around us. And we've had the chance to watch you, watch Scott, go out and follow Marissa Meyer. We've been invited over to other companies. John Donahoe's had us at eBay. And we observe these leaders of these great product companies. And what we have seen is there are a handful of characteristics that they all do consistently. One is the leaders and everybody in the company spend 20 to 40% of their time using their own products, using competitors' products, and spending time getting barriers out of the way of the teams that are building products. So that's one big thing that they do. The other thing they do is they're looking for ways for the functions to get to yes. For example, in our environment, it used to take weeks and sometimes months for engineers to get a hosting environment so they could do a quick rapid test. Sasan Gadarzi and his team have found out a way to get it provisioned in minutes or less than a day. And it's by thinking about the engineer as a customer and saying, how do I reimagine what I'm delivering so they can get things done fast? So we all have a role to play in creating an environment where these great products come out, but we have to be aware of what it takes for the customer, or in this case an engineer, to get their job done. So that's exciting stuff. And what I want to do now is we don't have to stay just on the product theme. We can go anywhere you want to go. But we have this rare opportunity to sit here with Mr. Bill Campbell, and he is on Disney mode right now. But we're about to switch to Cinemax very quickly, so get ready. No, I'm kidding. You ready for the first one?
Boy, that'll scare the shit out of you.
Man, that's soft stuff. Cinemax, we're going harder than that. All right, so let's open it up for questions. We got one online here, Bill. The question is, could you share any practical tips on things that you have seen great product leaders do that are very pragmatic, practical, like 1, 2, and 3?
So if I think about it, it's an interesting question. I was helping Google in a lot of their early days, and Eric Schmidt has become a great friend. When Facebook got started and became more prominent, he went over to see Mark Zuckerberg, and he went over there at the end of the day, like 5 o'clock, and there was Mark in a room with engineers just sitting around musing over product features, additions, things like that. Eric came back the next day and he says to me, oh my God, if I could go back to those days, where I could pay attention completely to all of that. I just love that stuff. He's a computer scientist by degree and an engineer by trade, and he was involved too administratively, he felt, in all the things that were going on. Great leaders have to make sure that if great products are what are going to change the face of the company, then you've got to pay attention to those. Mm-hmm. You've got to carve out time to be able to review those things. If it's 5 o'clock at night or if it's 7 o'clock in the morning, you've got to do it. I mean, look, it doesn't mean that a guy like a Steve Jobs can't still run the company financially, still run the company operationally, but he's really interested in every detail of the product, of the product, and he can push and say, this isn't simple enough. This isn't what we have to do in order to make a product great. If we're going to make a breakthrough product, we have to do the following things. Years ago, when you came up from San Diego, I was managing a lot of the QuickBooks development. It drove me crazy. I mean, I would come over because we had nobody in that role, nobody in the general manager role that really gave a shit about the thing. And it really, and we're desperate. We're trying to get a product out by the fall. Everybody was trying to push me out and say, well, we could get it out by January. You came up, first meeting you came in, sat down, we sat around that table, you asked 4 or 5 of the right questions. I slowly picked up my notepad and walked out the door. And I knew we were in great shape. I just knew that you were going to take this thing. And not only did we get all the features we needed, we even actually got a couple of more than we thought we were going to get. And you did it because you understood them, knew what they could get, pushed them into getting some of the key features so that we could get a release. Microsoft was coming in with an accounting product at that particular point, kicked them out to sea, and they never came back.
I had to swim in the pond for that. there was a wager. Thank you for saying that.
Oh, it was very obvious. Yeah. So you knew you had the right person. And when you get people that care deeply about products, I say this in a lot of companies. When I left, my first startup was Claris. When I left there, we put another guy in the role. And I went down. I was kind of irritable with Apple when they bought us back, put a guy in there, and I used to call it the best run company that never grew. We had operation reports that were really good, the financial reports were excellent, everything was good. So the company grew 2%, 3%, 4%. What happened to the wild days of kick-ass, take names, new products, get them out the door, let's do creative marketing, let's do everything that we needed to do to make, it just all went away. And so when you look at it, it did come down to the leader.
Yeah. Bill, I'm going to ask you a controversial one right now. Controversial because it's a hot topic and you've seen 2 sides of the continuum with Apple and with the time you spend at Google. How important are open platforms to delivering awesome products that get massive adoption and scale? So how open platforms
Well, look,
affect us and
it depends on open platform for what? When you go out there and have a proprietary technology like JavaScript or a proprietary technology like Flash or, you can't have that. I mean, if you want to make something ubiquitous, you got to make it ubiquitous. But when you think about Android, let's just take that as the one that probably whoever asked that question is referring to. You can take the product and make it to your own liking, like the Kindle, like Amazon's done.
Yep.
And they've taken a limited version of that where now there is no platform. The apps that Google wants to have in Google Play don't work on that. So what have you done? Well, you've enabled a competitor with a product that they can use to knock you on your tush. And so, the open platform on that one, you kind of roll your eyes. Every time in the beginning, when Andy Rubin, a brilliant, brilliant man, would let, whoever it was out there, HTC, Samsung, any of the ones that were coming up with products, and they put their own shell on top of the product. Then again, you couldn't push one button and have everybody upgrade. Apple can just push a button and everybody upgrades.
Yeah.
And then all the apps that are in the App Store work for the new configuration. So you've got to be careful as to what that means and what are you trying to accomplish through open. Gradually over time, you've watched Andy begin to limit those things and make sure that we have a consistent, whatever it is, jelly bean release or whatever they're calling any of their releases these days, so that there's some consistency that developers can have and consistency that consumers can use so that they know full well that they're going to be on the latest version.
Yeah.
The technology things that are out there today that need to be ubiquitous are open. I think they should be open, but it's unclear to me where Facebook Home is going to be. Where does that fit? I read reviews about this all the time. In fact, I was just looking at some this morning as to what people feel about it. I saw an advertisement last night, first time I saw an ad on it, and until they were showing it, and I wasn't sure what I was looking at until after it was done. But there's some limitations to it. Does it help Facebook? Might. Does it help HTC, who put out a phone with that? Might. Are other people going to sign up to it? Maybe not, but I think they might sign up to it as an app so that teenagers who are more likely to use Facebook would want to have that as their home page. So there's some benefit to it. Mm-hmm. I just think it varies by company, but having an open platform there are a lot of risks. Look at Apple. Apple wants to control the customer experience end to end. And they get shit all the time about they're dominant, they're indignant, they're just feisty about everything that goes on. They approve every app. They want to make sure that the whole ecosystem and infrastructure is all theirs and is approved by them. There was a time when they got criticized a lot, and that time has passed. I don't think you see that as much. I think everybody is reasonably happy that they're doing a good job with that curation and making sure that those of you out there with children are reasonably safe by letting your kids go in and buy an app, and that you're not going to get anything that you're distressed with. It's not that simple. I mean, we could talk about open for the rest of the day, but those are a couple of examples. The walled garden that everybody talks about, Jonathan Rosenberg, who was the senior VP of product marketing and product management at Google, wrote a long open versus closed, Apple versus Android way back. And I think he's changed a lot of his tune there as aberrative systems have come out from different hard goods manufacturers that want to differentiate their product by some bastardization of the OS. So it's open, somebody can use it, it's great. Who benefits? Well, don't know yet.
Yeah, well, it's a very nuanced topic, and you just touched on it. There's lots of things you can talk about with open. The thing that I love about your stories with Apple is they realized they couldn't build everything themselves, so they opened it up with APIs. So they have developers building unbelievably breakthrough apps that work on their platform, but they also wanted to make sure there was consistency around the operating system, one upgrade for all customers, and the customer experience. And they had a line of, look, what is it that's acceptable and not acceptable for Apple? So they're open to the extent that they aren't building everything themselves, but they're not so far open that they have fragmentation and quality experience issues and lots of other things. And I think that's a thing that we and other companies are wrestling through right now. Is that a fair sort of synopsis?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let me open it up to people in the room. We've taken a few online now. So we have Ann Dietrich in the back.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, Ann.
I'm so glad you're here today because there's a question that's been on my mind that I think you have a perfect vantage point to offer insight on. And that is when we think about great product design, there seems to be a tension going on between what I would call the auteur model, which is customers can't tell us what they want, so what we need is a visionary who can show the customer what they want, and the lean experiment, which says customers can't tell us what they want, but they can show us with their behavior what they want, and we should do rapid experimentation. I'm leaning towards the latter, but I'm seeing a lot of push towards the former, and I'm wondering what your perspective is on how hard is it to get a jobs, and how often are you going to end up with a Ron Johnson at JCPenney on the auteur model?
We've gone beyond Cinemax now. We're ready.
How the hell did we go from product to Ron Johnson? That's what I want to know. So when you think about, look, the lean experiments are good. And you know, the two directions that you talked about aren't that different, really. What happens is that, you know, I came from a real research organization like Kodak when I came to Apple in 1983. And I was always trying to push Steve into market research, and he would throw me out in the street most of the time. And he always believed that he had enough good people inside his organization that with taste that could tell him exactly what we needed. So we joked about that years later, that I don't think a marketing person would have created the Macintosh, but a good marketing person would have made it better. When you think about some of the flaws that we had in that product, right away, almost anybody that was a B plus or to an A marketer could have figured out and gotten rid of some of the problems that occurred at that time. So do I feel strongly that we ought to put out products that we think are good that we have not control tested? Not really. There were no mechanisms for that early. We spend a lot of time on service side, and we are online. Go back in those days when we didn't have any of that. You know, you put out a product, and if you thought about when you could get an upgrade, by the time you opened up the body and reprogrammed everything and then closed it all up and did your QA testing and got another product version out the door, I mean, it was a year. It was 18 months. So what you really had to do is you took a lot of risks there that the product was going to be right. The lean takes advantage of what the environment is today. And the environment is today rapid ability to change based on customer feedback. I say that when I was spending a lot of time at Google, we've got it, and of course I didn't know anything about lean at the time, 8 or 9 years ago, but you're constantly pushing everybody there to say, pay attention to the feedback. We put it out, listen, course correct. Make sure that we keep engineers on the product until there's at least it could go 1-1, 1-2, whatever. Keep them on a project until it was a 2-0. So that way everybody was listening, making corrections, they knew the code, they could do everything that they needed to do and make sure that rev got out the door. So I don't think they're that different. In the case of Ron Johnson, unfortunately a good friend, geez, I found out more shit in the New York Times this week than I ever knew about him, and I thought I knew about him. I thought I knew a lot about him. But as you know, I think there were a lot of people in the industry were really, really concerned about him being successful. Didn't want him to be successful, actually, because it would have changed a whole lot of the metaphors in the industry. And I think a lot of people there were saying, oh my God, this is what he's going to do. Now, was I surprised he got bagged? Yeah. I was surprised they didn't wait until at least the end of the year and see where this went. That the store within a store concept and some of these specialty things. But, Ron made a lot of mistakes, I think. And I say he certainly, according to the New York Times article this week, didn't pay attention to anybody. Whatever you do, you've got to keep your current business going while you're experimenting with your new one. And he didn't do that. What he did is he put a bullet hole in his current business and then went about trying to create a new one. And so when the new one went down, I mean, think about it, 25%. Gee, Merry Christmas, multi-billion-dollar company. It's a disastrous thing. Every time, whether I was here or whether I was at Claris, no matter where I was there, you always think about how you limit the downside as you're making product transitions, et cetera. He didn't do that at all. So.
Yeah, and just to build on that, because Bill and I spent a lot of time talking about this, we talk about it with the board and with the management team. There's always this argument of if you had asked a farmer what they wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse, not a plow. And so does it take this just all-knowing perspective to bring to the future? And then there's this other side, which is, look, in the world of rapid experimentation like lean startup, you have the ability to quickly see and not listen to what the customer says, but see what they adopt, and then that helps you double down where you should. And there's never a perfect answer, but there tends to be more of a tendency, as you and Bill both just pulled out, where today you can do more of the latter. But one thing that I really was impressive to me was Tony Fadal from Nest, who came and spoke to us, and Bill knows Tony well, and we were talking about him just in our one-on-one this week. He had probably the best teachable point of view that I've heard on this one. And it came down to when you're working with a product team and they're struggling with a decision, first come to the conclusion, is it a fact-based decision that you could run a rapid experiment and test? Or is it an opinion or principles-based decision where you just have to have the courage of your convictions? And 9 out of 10 times it'll be fact-based. And challenge the team to go back and run a quick experiment or two and come back and see. But if it's opinion-based, don't let the war and the raging debate go on. Have the courage to say, this person makes the call, and if it's you, make the call. And then if you see that it's wrong, just in the example of what we're talking about here, listen to that feedback and pull back. Make sure you pull back and use that as a test. So I think Bill's point of, they're not that far apart, but there are those rare occasions where you're going to have courage. But I think in the case of the example we just went through, if it's wrong, you're going to have the courage to also pull back and say, mea culpa, or I need more time. And that's kind of the balancing that I see on it.
Look, I watch... when Steve was away having his liver transplant, the development of the pad went on.
Yeah.
And it took some brilliant thinking by guys over there like Phil Schiller and Scott Forstall, to be able to make sure that Steve had a pure view of this was your computing device, and this went out, and this is your consumption device, and everything came in. But the practical aspects of what went on there from Phil Schiller and Scott Forstall was, look, we had to be able to. If you want to consume a spreadsheet, you better have something that's going to read Excel.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of stuff are the practical things. The other thing was, if we were going to compete with the first version of Amazon's tablet, that we had to have a publishing platform. And they went ahead and did that as well. But there's a lot of stuff that gets evolved by good product managers. And so there was a really good Scott Forstall and Phil Schiller, the two of them working together that convinced Steve that the practicality of some things needed to be in there, that the breakthrough aspect of the product would be not well received if it didn't have practicality. So
yeah, that's a good point.
That's where product management comes in, and those are good examples of how that works.
Yeah. Question over here?
Hey, Bill. I know you get to see a lot of awesome products in the making. Can you share with us some of your biggest surprises on the upside and the downside, and why do you think they happened?
Well, I think Brad just brought up Tony Fadal and Nest. I mean, you would think that something that's as boring as a thermostat in your house would be something that people would just yawn at and not really think was a breakthrough. And I was surprised how well it has done and is doing. And it'll be the first of many products that will come out of that company, because they've got a brilliant engineering, they've got a brilliant CEO and a brilliant engineering team that are going to really do good work. The one that disappointed me that I thought was a social browser was Rockmelt. I think they had probably as good a UI as I've ever seen. This really was beautifully, beautifully done. It took feeds from all the social media sites, Twitter and Facebook, et cetera, and aggregated them. And yet it's not taken off. It's one of the most beautiful things I've seen. And it looks like it's enormously practical. I mean, I use a lot of it myself, but again, that's not taken off. So those would be surprises on one end. I think that the Rockmelt guys were really, 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 really talented. The whole team there is good. Begun to revise it so that they've got momentum now. But it was a surprise right off the bat when that didn't work. And I do think the upside surprise for Nest, I thought they were going to have a good product. I thought it might be niched, a niche-like product, and it's really expanded the category and has become a big deal, even to the point, you can always tell when you're successful if you get sued.
Good point.
Honeywell's got a bullet hole in, the site's set on them, so.
Yeah. Bill, I got a two-part question that came in from online. One is from a product manager asking for coaching for a product manager. How do you prioritize your time to do the most important things if you're a product manager? And then I'm going to ask you a related question for you, but I'll start with the first one.
So the first one is, you better be spending all your time with the head engineer. When Eric and I worked a lot, Eric Dunn and I worked a lot together, you would sit there at night and go over what features could get into a new product. And the product manager would talk about, well, this may be important, and engineer would say, well, I might be able to get that in. Let me think about how to do that. And so when you're a product manager, you're writing lists of things and checking dates and all that. That's a bunch of bullshit. I mean, you can take the last 10 minutes of your day and do that. You ought to be working with an engineer all the time, thinking very, very carefully about, what product features go in and what kind of trade-offs have to be made. You're not going to make those decisions, but you ought to be there making sure that all the best thought is going into what, if you're giving up something that a competitor has. I would, for instance, again, go back to Google. When Larry Page wanted to get 40 languages right out off the bat. And Alan Eustace was challenged with that, who was the senior vice president of engineering, because not all those products were absolutely appropriate for the countries. And so he had to go around and make sure that each country, if there were some point solution there that they had to be better than, that they could actually do some development there, that they could make sure that they mitigated the point solution, and at the same time get it localized for a country. That took a lot of really good people to think about that. Jonathan Rosenberg in product management, and Nikesh Arora, who was the general manager of Europe, and things like that. But those are wonderful ways for people to work together. You've got to work together. It is not me pass it over the transom and you say, I like it or I don't like it. I mean, you've got to work together. That's what, if I had to say how to spend your time, it ought to be with your engineers almost all the time. And look, there's a lot of other stuff that you have to do to go on. But, you have functional organizations here that you have to trust. People, like in manufacturing, in our case, that kind of logistics is rapidly on the downside. But you have sales and marketing that you really need to pay attention to, and how we get, how we get all, and the corporate communications and all, how we get all that stuff out the door and done. And that's a lot of your coordination points. But boy, if you're not spending 80% of your time with your engineering, then you're not doing the right thing.
And just talk to me a little bit about how design fits into that. I mean, you work a lot with Apple, and you see how important design is, and Johnny Ivey, and you've been with other great companies. And, you know, in today's world, whether it's Jack Dorsey talking about it's really a design-driven environment. You've got your engineer, your product manager, and you've got what we call user design or XD. How do you see that fitting into the mix?
Okay, so now we're back to engineering again, and I would say this, that if you have a green eye shade engineer and all they're going to do is program the shit out of something, you know, just do a lot of back-end work, I mean, that's fine. I mean, there's enormously valuable people to do that. But if you want to be a product lead and run a product, you better understand what usability is. Now, somebody can help you with a little bit of course correction there along the way. I mean, I think everybody has this, you know, this great view that you know, there's one product design person and everything just kind of goes through one person. I think it goes through one person for approval. You know, at Apple it was Johnny, and it was Steve as well. Johnny does more than just the design element, you know, in the software side, which he's doing now. But I mean, if you had good people there that really had to understand the interaction. There was a cult early of the Mac cult. You had to do it. This was the way the Mac should work. That worked for a lot of years.
Yeah.
But today, as things are changing, you know, the iOS interactions and design are all, you know, I mean, they're not anything like the Mac was in 1984.
Yeah.
So when I think about it, if you don't have engineers that can get you 90% there, and then you're kind of course correcting, you know, or putting finishing touches on, or making this easier, or figuring out different ways to go from point A to point B on your computer, to go from page to page, and how that links and all of that. You can't be there. You have to be good at that to be an engineer. I mean, you have to be good at it. It isn't like, okay, I did the hard coding, really stuff. I did the hard stuff. Let's turn it over to somebody who'll change the design. What? I mean, you can't do that.
I love it. Bill, we just spent a couple weeks ago at our officers meeting, this exact topic was a key topic, which is we have to have a way to be clear on the vision the product's trying to deliver, and what are the design principles that everyone knows that they can actually do their part of the job, if it's engineering doing great work, or product manager or someone else that supports those design principles. And I think over time, as you know, because you've been with us since you were 17.
100 years old, yeah.
That, you know, when you don't have some sort of guiding light or design principle, you look like a Tower of Babel. If you laid our products out on a conference room table and asked the customer to pick two of them made by Intuit, they wouldn't be able to tell you who they were. So it's not a roll your own and smoke them thing, but it is absolutely, there's a set of guiding, well, unless you're from West Virginia. And then there are some guiding principles and engineers doing that work to deliver something that's awesome, but inspired by some sort of, you know, the principles that make it fit with the rest of the ecosystem.
There has to be some way of unification of what those things are.
Yeah.
And that's where, you know, design, you called it principles, design principles come in. But you know, if you have to start from the beginning and you think about design, if you only think about design as UI, then you're wrong.
Yeah,
I mean, it isn't
exactly.
that. It is the ability to traverse your product. It's the interaction from how the customer interacts with the product, how it goes from here to there with how many steps. I mean, you go back to Amazon, think about it years ago, you know, the one-step ordering thing. I mean, that was a breakthrough. That's a user interface thing? No, it's a functional thing. And they put a little pretty interface on it, but the fact is it's a design principle that they got, and they got it, and they got it right.
Yeah.
And nobody else was able to really interact with it without copying it completely.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm saying to you that engineers need to do that. So we need those kinds of people that really believe that they can provide that. And if it means that then there is a guru who's going to ensure that, or can write ahead of time so that they can do it, but you know, the design principles so that we have a unified interaction. But you look, I say, when I look at the iOSs, I mean, just look, I don't need to give you anything that you don't already know when you think about the functionality that continues to evolve in iOS iOS, 4, 5, 6,
Right.
7,
Yep.
and watch it come back to the Macintosh desktop. So there's some design principles that have been really important to the company. You can't say, okay, let's make these two things the same and let's go backwards.
Yeah.
You've got to say, if we're going to do this, this is going to be a commitment to a breakthrough in the way we're going to do stuff, and we're going to take everything that we have there when we can do it. It doesn't have to happen immediately. I mean, you have an iOS out. I mean, you have a OS out for OS X something, and that's what I think Apple does brilliantly. That everybody kind of knows where the design principles are trending, and this is where Steve, Johnny, Tim, and all the lead engineers on projects have been so good.
Yeah, and I'm going to open it up to the audience for another question here because we're winding down on time. To your point, if you start thinking about the next chapter with mobile and tablets, our team was able to look at SnapTax, and it did not do the same thing that TurboTax did. It threw the interview out the window and used the pictures and a couple of targeted questions to get a tax return done. And then we basically said that's the new paradigm for TurboTax. And so the team's now bringing that in. And same thing with Nyla, which is the QuickBooks for the tablet, QuickBooks Online, bringing things back into QuickBooks. So wonderful ways of how you evolve your thinking. Another question from the audience?
So Bill, okay. Bill, I've been here for a little over a year. And as a social scientist, I have a simple question. Maybe my premise is incorrect. But my premise is that senior executives have to be very politically savvy. And so I'm curious, how does a leader make sure that you align the cunning of your executive team with customer interests? Because potentially you could just win turf, sustain your BU from political savvy alone. So as a leader, how do you make the alignment between that savvy, that cunning, meet customer needs?
So, it's probably the best question I'll get in a year. And I'm serious about it because, what will bring companies to their knees is internecine warfare. I mean, it's just the way it happens. And this is where the CEO, or if you are, the general manager of a large group and you have subgroups under, but let's assume it's a CEO. Your job is to break ties. And if you don't see where the ties are, where the ties actually are, then you probably shouldn't be in that chair. You've got to sit in that meeting and try to find out if A is working with B and B is working with C. And if they're not consistent on what they're doing, or if you're having one-on-ones with your people and you're saying to your engineering guy, how's it working with product management? How's it working with operations? Are we getting this? And the minute that you hear, tell me, let's get both of you in the room. Let's get them together. Let's sit down. And I mean, you just have to say, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you guys to Friday to solve this problem. If you don't solve it by Friday, then I'm going to solve it. You have to do that because the political battle doesn't happen at the top. The political problem just goes down into the organization. Everybody's paralyzed by the fighting that the top executives have all the time. My first trip through Apple with the John Scully regime, chaotic that way. Turf grabbing, power building, nobody ever broke ties. So what you did is, if you felt like you wanted to do something, you just went out and did it. Didn't matter whether somebody else was supposed to do it or not. Donna Dubinsky has a terrific case in Harvard Business School, about that kind of stuff at Apple then. We've got to break those ties. You cannot let these things occur. You just can't. And if you do, you've got to be forceful, angry, and be willing to fire somebody for not cooperating. That will bring a company to its knees worse than anything. So I'm saying that if you're running a large organization and you're in a really important role and you have staff, you better make sure that staff's working together, and you better cover. I used to sit in on a meeting or two with some prominent people in the Valley and watch. And at the end of the meeting, it'd say, how'd it go? And I'd say, well, you should have broken that tie right then. You knew the right answer already. I'll let them work it out. Okay, let them work it out till Friday. But if it's not worked out, it's going to cripple the company if you don't break that tie.
Well said.
I'm wild man about that.
Well said. All right, so we've got, unfortunately, Bill, I'm going to have to wrap us up here because we're coming up on the hour. But I'm going to ask you one last question. We are celebrating our 30th anniversary as a company, 3 decades. You have been with us for many, many, many years. You are in tremendous demand. In fact, the number of people who've asked me in 10 years, hey, will you introduce me to Bill Campbell so I can spend some time with them one-on-one? And I hear from Debbie Brookfield, it happens all the time, and yet you still choose to spend time with us, invest us, lead us, be our chairman. What is it about Intuit that is special to you, and you vote with your time to continue to invest in us and to invest in me?
So, it's not a difficult question. You know, when I started Claris, I really wanted to have a legacy, and I felt like doing something great would be, Yogan Dalal, Donna Dubinsky, Dave Kinzer, Randy Commissar. It was great, and Apple took that dream away. They had a right to buy the company, and they had a put, and they took it, and that was it. So, I had the opportunity to do some other stuff, maybe venture capital. I wanted to go run a company, and when I met Scott, it was easy. Though it wasn't easy them hiring me. Scott was looking for somebody that was way more visionary than I was, honestly, and we still laugh about that. I had an inside there where Eric Dunn's wife was our outside counsel at Go, and she recommended me to Eric, and I think that helped me get things through there.
Way to go, Eric.
But after I met Scott and worked with him for some period of time, I just felt like it was his company, and you and I talk about this a lot. It's still his company. He's still our visionary leader. It's somebody that we look at almost iconically. How do you not want to help Scott? I couldn't walk away when, even some of the difficult times that we had years ago with some management things and all that. Once you came in and you exhibit the values that you have, you care deeply about people, you care deeply about products. What else is there? We can talk about so many other things that we should care deeply about, but people and products are what we're all about here. And to see the way you run the company and just these kind of open forums, the clarity of your direction, the transparency of where we are and everything that we do. And then, with Scott kind of guiding us from a let's call it a, kind of heart and soul perspective. How do you not want to stay here? Look, I like doing what I'm doing. I try to help companies. I never wanted to go another place. I've thought about going other places, going to venture capital firms and doing things like that. But my independence is important to me, and my devotion to Intuit's important to me. So, and you. So
I will tell you, Bill, every single day you make us better. We love having you as our chairman, as our inspiration, as our friend, and we absolutely appreciate that you broke your typical principle and you came out today and spoke on a live broadcast.
I can't wait. Where's Caroline? She didn't even stay, huh?
We were just bullshitting you. No, I'm just kidding.
After I dragged her ass out of New York and brought her out to Silicon Valley.
Everybody, thanks so much for coming. We appreciate it. Take care.